Hi, everybody. I'm Sergei Ostapenko, CEO of Mira Commerce. Today, my guest is Alan Pledger. He is the co-founder and CEO of Makeswift, which is part of commerce.com. And he is a Georgia Tech computer science grad. He's built his career on engineering architecture and product leadership. And he is one of the most interesting people in our technology space in e-commerce today. Before Makeswift, he built a platform called Lending Lion that got acquired by ActiveCampaign, has a life on its own. And then he started Makeswift, which became the visual no-code tool editor that got acquired by BigCommerce, which is now commerce.com. Under his leadership, it evolved into a tool which is allowing marketers and content teams to have complete freedom while still keeping quality and performance front and center. That's the claim. And he is not just dreaming about the future of the web tools, he's building them today. And so we met with Alan at Big Summit in Austin a few weeks ago, had a very interesting conversation about the future of content management and all of the platforms in this ultra competitive space. So Alan is willing to share his opinions and thoughts on where this is all going. And so it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Welcome, Alan.
Hey, thanks, Sergey. It's great to be here. This is actually my first podcast that I've done, so
Yeah,
it should
that's
be
great.
exciting. Yeah.
Good. Let's get going. So give me a little bit of the background behind Makeswift. How did you decide to launch that new journey on your own? And how did this end up to be a product in the commerce.com offering?
Yeah, so we started off as a landing page builder, like you mentioned, and we went through Techstars Atlanta back in
Mhm.
2017. And a big part of that experience was really trying to push. And there's fundraising involved. You're meeting with 100 mentors in like a week, in their program, like Mentor Madness is what they call it.
Mhm.
And the entire time you're getting pushed to think big, like what's the big problem? And when we were looking at the landing page space, there's always this kind of like feeling digging at me around like, do I have full conviction in the landing page space? And I was always very confused as to why. When I first got into looking into this problem, I was like, why does this category of tools even exist in the first place, right? Like you already have a tool to manage your website. Why are marketing teams buying a separate tool for landing pages? And we kind of started by looking at the landscape and looking at our competitors and being like, hey, let's try to make a better one, which is not a product strategy I would recommend, but it's kind of how we got started, especially as a technical founder without the deep domain expertise at the time. And we
Mhm.
were looking into how do we replicate some of the problems that they're trying to solve. And through that whole experience, we learned a lot working with customers. We got probably like our first 100 customers pretty quickly. And what we noticed in the data was like we had A/B testing features, we had reporting features, we had a session playback built in that was similar to like Full Story or Hotjar. We had a lot of sprawl basically. And what we noticed is that pretty much all of our really active users and the ones paying us the most were heavily leveraging the builder. And from an analytics perspective, they were all bringing their own analytics. They weren't looking at our reports. Session replay was nice. It demoed well, but it really wasn't a strong part of the value that they were getting. And we noticed that people were building like full websites in our landing page builder, despite the lack of like bulk management features. It was very
Mhm.
manual. We had a really nice copy paste feature that people would just like open up a million tabs and copy paste things across. And I think the takeaway there for us was that there is a demand for non-technical marketers, like non-specialists is what I'll call them, that want to just get their job done quickly. And they want a system that they can fully wrap their mind around. So that way they can quickly iterate on the concepts that they have in their head. And one of the interesting takeaways that we noticed at the time was that there were a lot of people starting from scratch, which I don't know if you've ever built a website, but like making a page from a blank slate, just like fully blank, a lot of times is pretty daunting. And we saw a lot of people able to reason about the layout they wanted and starting from a blank canvas. And that was something that we took note of our user experience was something unique at that time, which was allowing people to, creatively express themselves. So what we decided to do from there was we wanted to focus in on what we were really good at and kind of shed the features that were holding us back. Like for instance, the session replay feature, in order for us to fully replay things in dynamic components like carousels and accordions, we had to record what are called DOM mutations. And that's a big part of what Full Story does, for instance. And that's a lot of data infrastructure. It's a lot more data to capture, to replay. It's a huge step up in complexity. And we weren't necessarily sure if we wanted to invest in that because that's an entire product category in and of itself. And if we wanted to really go after how do we take this user experience and apply it to everybody, we needed to shed some of those features. And that's how we ended up kind of pulling that thread of how can we take this landing page builder experience that apparently marketers do want, and they want to be able to control layout, and how do we scale it up so that way you could theoretically manage a full large scale enterprise website without compromising that user experience.
So 2017, 18, 19, and the CMS market is a very broad market with a lot of players that are claiming to do it all and be great choice for either SMB, mid-market, or enterprise. So Forrester has its own assessment of leaders in that space, and they all have pluses and minuses. When you went to market, what did you decide to explicitly be in scope and out of scope in the feature set? What was your value proposition to those that were considering you alongside with headless CMSs or Adobe Experience Managers of this world? Give me perspective on that.
Yeah, so when we started, we really wanted to focus in on being the best visual builder possible. Makeswift begins and ends at visual composition. We really wanted to start with the user experience we're trying to build and work backwards, test and see how far we can extend that user experience across all the different use cases that come along in website management. And that user experience, we really think about it in terms of sitting in between the low code, no code, very wizard based, kind of SMB focused website building experiences, and the heavily designer focused user experiences like Webflow and Framer that are really powerful. But with that power comes a lot of complexity that you have to learn. And that makes it a little bit less approachable for somebody who's not a specialist, somebody whose job it is to launch the campaign, not necessarily learn how to use a specific tool. So we wanted to create a tool that kind of offered a Canva level experience. I think we use that a lot internally around when we think about our target audience and our target user, and trying to thread that needle. So when I think about where it ends, when I think about like data collection and assumptions around what components are doing, we don't want to reach into what a component is doing, right? Whether or not a component is fetching data from BigCommerce or from Magento or WordPress or structured data from another system. But we want to make no assumptions about that. We really want to map our user experience to the current architecture of building websites and building UIs in general. At the time in 2017, when we pivoted, the React component model was becoming really popular. Before that, everything was very model view controller. And I think my hypothesis around why CMSs look the way they look today is because we basically modeled that entire product category off of the architecture of the time. And I don't think that we have rethought and readapted the idea of a CMS to the new modern UI architecture, which there's a very stark contrast in how we built front ends before the component model, which every framework has adopted these days. React, Vue, Angular all use it. I don't think the CMSs have really caught up and adapted to that mental model. And that's what we've been really trying to challenge ourselves to do is, what do CMSs look like in this component-based future?
Yeah. So many questions to what you just said, and lots of unpack. The first one is, if you're building the visual editor with a Canva-like experience that is so easy to use, aren't you limiting yourself by default to the SMB low end of the market, where most of the companies are going to want to automate as much as they can the creation of websites, and that space is very quickly is getting overtaken by lovables.com of this world? Are you not limiting the future of this tool?
I actually don't think it is limiting for the high end of the market. I actually don't know if I agree that it pushes it down towards
Okay.
SMB.
Why not?
Because if you think about the current experience of managing a website for an enterprise, it's very form-based. It's even more limiting than what I'm describing. It's not like, the large enterprises of the world today have a full drag and drop flexible canvas to go build new content with. They're pretty much limited by whatever schema that the developer has designed and integrated into the code base that they have. So I look at it as a huge upgrade to the flexibility at the enterprise level.
But then you also have to make the trade-offs between the structured content and scheduling and publishing and governance of this content, localization, and the visual editing toolkit, which if you give the full freedom for anybody to edit and create the amazing user experiences, then how do you combine that with that enterprise level governance that's required at that level?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've actually spent a ton of time thinking about this, because really what we're doing is like I said, we're trying to map base all of these concerns to a new architecture. So it's been solvable before in this, the older architecture. I believe it's solvable in this new architecture because all of these principles still apply in the sense that localization and personalization and everything that involves like basically variations of the data. If you look at the schema for most headless builds, there are almost always like layout properties in that schema, right? How many columns does this section have? So all we're doing in Makeswift is we're assigning kind of a pre-baked schema for layout that is hidden away from what the developers have to deal with, right? You integrate your components, you let us handle the layout, and then all of the same principles when it comes to personalization and localization and basically just creating variations of that content still apply, right? You can just check out a new version, make changes to it. I think the biggest change when it comes to data governance for a CMS and the way we're rethinking about it, because where this really gets tricky is when you think about like field level governance, and that you see that a lot in CMSs where it's like, I want to prevent this user from touching this specific field on this model. And we get asked about this a lot. And I think we have a different perspective on how we want to prevent that, because I think that type of governance, it's very expensive and costly to maintain. That's typically like someone's job, is to manage governance, who has access to what, right? And especially if there's a person wanting to make a change, they may not be blocked by the developer, but they may be blocked by permissions, right? And that is also just, that's another contributing factor to organizational agility and lack thereof. I think the way to solve that is we look at the way developers make changes, right? Like when you onboard a new developer, that new developer can break your production site the same as a new intern could come into a visual builder and break the site. The reason why we trust the code, though, is because Git, almost everybody, I'm assuming, uses Git these days. But Git offers a really safe way for people to test their changes in a sandbox, throw up a very clear set of changes to be reviewed and approved. And then there's oftentimes permissioning lives at that merge level, right? We don't say, hey, developer, you can only access these files. You can only touch these variables. That would be insane, right? We would never be able to build anything. We say, hey, here's a safe place for you to play. Once you have your changes done, let me see what they are. I'll review every line in that change, make sure it's not going to break anything, test it in a staging environment, and then we'll roll it out. And I think a big problem with the way that we think about governance today is because that system doesn't exist for most marketing teams. That all of these field-based access controls is because we don't have that kind of ability to let people test things in a sandbox. So what we want to do is say, like, hey, if that works for startups and it works for enterprises, right? Because startups, we use Git when we were a two-man team. BigCommerce and Commerce use GitHub for their side, their teams. And pretty much every company nowadays uses GitHub. And so it's proven its ability to scale. We want to take that concept and say, hey, can we apply that to the CMS and really just kind of match it, reduce down the complexity a little bit, so you're not necessarily looking at lines of code, but we present a very clear diff, essentially, to like, hey, here's what the person changed, here's the specifics of it, and then somebody else can review and approve it. And that should make it where we can push more flexibility down to the people that are trying to make new content.
Let's talk about use cases. If I consider myself to be a merchant and I already have some battle scars and I develop websites on multiple shopping cart suites and I moved more into this modular composable way of thinking, but I'm still on the template, pretty much tied into the templating engine that an e-com platform offers today. When you come to me and say that Makeswift does that and it's the greatest visual editor today and we have a different approach to content management from the others, what do I buy from you and what's my way forward with you?
That's a great question. I think the first question I would ask is, what is the goal that you're trying to achieve? If it looks something like or the problem you're trying to solve, if it looks something like my marketing team isn't able to move as fast as they need to for creating new block types, new page types, then I would say, okay, I think Makeswift might be a good fit. We'll use Stencil, for example, right? And I'm trying to bring in Makeswift. So Makeswift is now compatible on any React front end. So you would basically install React onto that page, and then you would do a light integration in your theme to Makeswift, which will have snippets for. We're updating our docs right now to talk about how to do this. And then you just load up that website inside of Makeswift, and anywhere that there's a little Makeswift region that you've defined, you should be able to hook into it and then start dropping in components from Makeswift. So that would be the simplest way to do an integration. I think if you're looking at more of a headless approach and you're wanting to do a deeper integration into Makeswift and bring over more parts to your site, that would look a little bit closer to either a replatform or setting up some type of proxy in front of your site and doing a deeper integration that way. But there's, I think given the flexibility of Makeswift and the SDKs, there's a lot of options in front of you. So it really would depend on what the priorities were.
All right. Well, let's assume that I am more evolved and I'm more forward thinking and I'm building the fully headless composable experience to improve performance, to improve those user experiences, build amazing UI. And my options there would be to build a custom React Next.js storefront hosted somewhere and use a shopping cart, something like BigCommerce or any other shopping cart that has great APIs and can scale. And then I need to take a look at the search tool, enterprise level, that delivers discovery ability for the content, for the products, and so forth. And then I need a CMS. And today the choices are pretty straightforward, like headless CMSs, the caliber of Contentstack, Contentful, Sanity, dozens of them. And so in this paradigm, what do you do different from any one of these CMSs?
Yeah.
How is Makeswift different?
I would say it comes down to the appetite for flexibility. Some organizations, right, don't want the developers to be removed from the front lines. And for them, I would say, Makeswift might not be the best fit. Really,
Okay.
our goal here is to allow marketers to move and go to production without having to get developers involved for every single change that's beyond just adding a new entry type to a content type. What I would do if I was sitting down with somebody evaluating Makeswift is I would look at the schema of their CMS configuration, and if it looks a lot like there's a content type for each block type. So basically you would have like a content type for your hero, a content type for a 2-column feature section. And then you have some type of content type for like a page that just has a reference to a list of block types. I think that looks a lot like something that should be inside of Makeswift, because they obviously want to have this kind of concept of composition that the marketer should be able to do. If everything is like heavily locked down and you have a content type for each individual type of page, and I'm just like adding records to it, and I don't want the marketing team to be able to really diverge from that at all. It may be it may be a tougher sell at this current day to do the full thing inside of Makeswift, and I think that's okay, because we want to work towards that eventually with our upcoming roadmap, which I can speak to a little bit later. But the idea of having UI in your schema, I think, is the first smell that I'm looking for. Do you have this concept of like columns and padding and margin in your schema? If so, that means that like you're not truly omnichannel, right? You've now coupled that content type to the web client. So at that point, I'm like, well, it sounds like you're trying to describe a component. Most of the implementations I've seen, the props of the component literally map one-to-one to the columns in the data type. So you have essentially modeled your component. And once we release our Makeswift APIs to be able to fetch components by type and pull out that prop data, you essentially have the same thing. You could register a hero section inside of Makeswift. Once we have the APIs for you to query your elements by blog post type, and you can pull down the title, the author, what's the difference really between what you've done in Contentful versus in Makeswift? Except inside of Makeswift, it's purely visual. I would argue that you'd also register all of your design system components, so that way marketers have the option to go off the reservation a little bit, give them some leeway to go make a new section, so that way they don't have to tap a developer. I still think that having that review and approval process is critical for this to work, because you definitely want to have some type of stage where I can look at a proposed new section type and be like, hey, maybe tweak this margin or tweak this padding. But I think we should allow the marketing teams to be able to try and get as far as they can, because I think that's the only way that we can get faster as an organization trying to manage web content.
Okay, so clear case against the common headless CMSs out there. But what about the comparing yourself to Builder.io or Plasmic in terms of architecture? And do you see any gaps that Makeswift has today against those? Are these really the targets for you that you're aspiring to be like more like them in terms of their approach?
That's a great question. And it shows that you've done your homework here, because I think Builder.io and Plasmic we've been aware of and kept our eye on for a while here, and I have a great deal of respect for those teams. And I think we're all kind of in the same camp of we I think see the architecture the same way. We see this component-based future. Both of those have CMS products now, which is interesting. We look at them a lot for inspiration in their APIs. I think that their architecture and their technical teams they seem to have a brilliant set of engineers on both sides. Where I think we really differ from them is really around the user experience focused. And I'll put it this way. Our philosophy is that any task that would normally fall to a specialist should not be done in the UI. And I don't think that Builder and Plasmic have that same philosophy. And the reason why I say this is because when I think about the interface, like a UI interface, and it's just UX in general, you kind of have like a fixed set of real estate to work with, and every single task and every single thing that you add to it adds and takes away space from that real estate. So, if I put a bunch of tasks in the UI for the developer to do, that's just going to make it more complicated for the marketer, or we're going to have to build in a lot of complexity in the UI to kind of sift that out, right? It's a lot more like product work to figure out how do I hide that complexity from the marketer. We've really tried to be slower, I think, in terms of how we roll things out, for the sake of keeping things simple in the UI, because really what we want to optimize for is that marketer efficiency. And we want to make sure that they feel productive in the tool. And when I look at what Builder is doing and what Plasmic is doing, Plasmic especially, they're very focused on, it seems like, designers and specialists. Like their user experience is powerful. It's more powerful than Makeswift. I'll be honest about that. But I think that power doesn't come for free. I think that power it's more complex. You're exposed to more concepts as a marketer. There's more configuration that has to happen, especially if you're a developer. You have to kind of switch modalities more between sometimes you're inside the UI doing some stuff, sometimes you're in code doing stuff. My opinion is that I think that most developers would prefer to stay in the code and kind of focus in on the tools that they're familiar with, right? And keep them inside of SDKs and APIs and, instead of Cursor or VS Code or whatnot. So we try to limit that. I also think there's a problem with as soon as you have code living inside of the CMS, now when you're troubleshooting issues, you don't know, like you have an error that happens, right? I've seen this in a couple builder implementations where they don't seem to have an opinion around like whether or not like a little JavaScript function should live inside of builder or inside of the host environment. And I've seen people put like submit handlers inside of builder. And that makes it where like when something fails, it's not like there's one place to go look and see where that error happened.
So if you come to a customer and it's a marketer you're talking to and they say, we already are headless and we're on Builder.io or Storyblok, we're good. What's your pitch to them? What's the value proposition there?
Well, first I would try to dig into how productive they feel on Builder.io or Storyblok. If it's something that they feel like, they know very well and they feel very productive in it, be like, okay, cool, that's not a great fit, especially if they're already fully integrated. But, if it's something where they feel like it's a little bit slow to get campaigns out or it feels a little complicated or there's things that they have to kind of sift through that don't feel relevant to them, that's where I would probably dig in a little bit more and try to understand specifically how their implementation is set up. And, especially with tools where the visual part of it was added later. Builder.io is less than that because Builder was built from the ground up as, similar to Makeswift. I think that they have, again, like I mentioned earlier, they've put a lot of features into their product, and I think that has come at a cost in terms of, approachability for somebody who's not fully trained on their tool. Storyblok, though, and other headless CMSs, I think, suffer from this issue of just being really developer focused, I think, and less marketer focused. So I would try to first probe and see how productive and efficient the marketers feel when running their campaigns. Like I said, I think there's certain problems that we're trying to see if we can solve without going into structured content. I look at tools like Webflow, and Framer has done this as well. Plasmic has this, Builder has it. They've all introduced a CMS component. I think a lot of the reasons for that is because their primary visual building experience has gotten too complicated for the marketers to very quickly do their changes without risk of breaking something. And I look at that as still a goal that we'd like to try to solve, of saying like, hey, can we create that landing page builder experience? Can we have a whole roadmap of guardrail features that we want to do to see if we can push the boundaries on like what merchants would be willing to accept, giving their marketing teams free reign over doing before we reach for that adding a structured database into our system. It's not that we can't do it, right? Like, in fact, that's probably the easier way to solve this, is just to add the ability to like, we built something similar to this for our form feature way back in the day that we've since deprecated. But the idea of like creating a schema for a data type and then adding some type of form interface to punch in data and then like merging it into a page is something that we are open to doing and we can do. But I think we're a little bit more interested by the idea of once we have element APIs and good APIs to query the structure out of our component data model, will people be able to solve the same problems using those APIs? And what things do we actually need to put in a structured database? Because I have this hypothesis that most of the structured content that we're trying to integrate into already exists somewhere, right? Like when you think about your product catalog data, right? That's true omnichannel data. That already exists inside of, whatever tool you're using for your product catalog. I think there's a lot of things that get thrown my way, like recipes, things like that, blog posts. I think you can model all of those things as components. I think oftentimes when you look at the schemas and you ask yourself, why are these fields in the schema? It's due to some design that somebody has. Somebody built some design in Figma. They looked at it. They said, oh, okay, we have an accordion here for all of our FAQs. So I'm going to have a question and an answer field for each of my FAQs. And my answer field may be dictated by what the rendering engine has, right? Like it may be a rich text component. In that case, I'm assuming that it's an HTML renderer, right, that I'm rendering that answer by. So I think there's always some kind of initial client that we're optimizing our schemas for. And I'm like, if it's the web and we give you APIs and you build that stuff visually, then, like, have we not solved the same problem, but in a slightly different way? And I want to test that idea a little bit more, because what I've learned through the whole landing line experience is every time you add a new feature in, that's a very heavy decision. Now you have customers relying on it and using it, and it becomes harder to steer. So we've intentionally tried to stay, a little bit lighter. So that way, especially now, I'm kind of glad we made this decision with AI. I think we can be a little bit more nimble in how we pivot around in terms of capturing the AI opportunities.
So I was waiting until this word AI would come up in the conversation. I'm glad you mentioned it first. Make me excited about the AI roadmap of Makeswift. What features are you actively considering to be driven by AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I'm very, very excited about AI and Makeswift. There's three main. I'll start by kind of doing a high level breadth first of what we're currently focused on. We're looking at AI for image asset generation. I think that's a
Mhm.
very easy one. Especially one of the restrictions or challenges that we're trying to give ourselves is we want to generate on brand imagery. We want to be able to like look at the files that you have in the file manager, and when you ask for a new file or a new image, we
Yeah.
infer brand consistency aspects to it and make sure that we try to generate images that you might actually use. I've seen some demos that are a little compelling about this, but I think the technology is still, I go back and forth on if that's even viable. Translations, we have an alpha coming soon for that. That's pretty straightforward. I think there's nothing really too novel
Yeah.
there. I think everyone's kind of adding in AI
Yeah.
translations. The designer piece I think is novel to Makeswift and to like, to Builder Plasmic as well. It's really a part of the data model that we've designed. So if you think about with the structured data model, I gave a demo at Big Summit of a natural language prompt that generated like a whole new section or a whole new page. If you were to try to do that in a tool where you had to like predefine your schema and layout was part of that schema, it would be near impossible to do that without having to generate some code, right? If I wanted to generate like a full new block type or full new page type, I would have to model a new schema type, like a new content type,
Mhm.
and then I would also have to like write code that maps to that. And I think the whole point of the CMS is to give non-technical teams a fast lane to production. So if we generate code as part of that step, that kind of eliminates the value prop of a CMS. So I think that's a really important part of what we've been trying to do is that natural language prompt we want, it's generating Makeswift data so that way it's visually editable and it's not code. It's not something that has to go through code review. We can automatically validate it so we're sure it's not going to go break production when you make it. And then we can also generate new layout structures because the layout schema is actually a Makeswift schema. So we can make assumptions about it. We can design for it. The problem with most headless CMS implementations is that the way everyone implements their layout schema is different. So it's pretty tough for a AI model to infer how they might reason about layout in your custom schema. But
Yeah.
because we own that, our AI model can do that.
So this leads me into my next question, which I think would be an interesting one to unpack. Neha Sampath, the founder of Contentstack, I captured her quote where she said, "Context is the most important currency in business. For decades, marketers have relied on segments, rules, and best guesses to engage customers. Agent OS in the Contentstack Edge platform changes that forever." So, for those of you who have not heard, Contentstack just launched this Agent OS capability in the platform. They just presented it publicly. And so she's talking about how content is dead and how it's going to be replaced by the context related to content consumption, generation, and so forth. And so I think that's an interesting one because we see a lot of these platforms that used to be just content management platforms evolve into personalization platforms where it actually tracks the clicks, the ways that you interact with the content, and then serves you the content which is the most appropriate for you. First of all, do you agree with her that this is where it's all going? And do you have that in the roadmap of Makeswift?
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, I love that insight. I don't know if I necessarily agree. I mean, that sounds a little provocative. The idea that like content doesn't matter anymore; it's all context. I think the way I interpret that is that with AI, it's almost become, and I mean this in the best possible way. Like the technology has become boring in the sense that it just works, and we can do a lot of really cool stuff with this technology now. And the idea of being able to like determine a lot of information about a user's intent and then use that to drive personalization is something I definitely agree with. I don't think it's an either or. When I think about that problem space, I look at like three main camps. You have the actual content and the variant creation, right? That stuff I think very clearly lives within Makeswift, right? I want to be able to hook
Mhm.
into SSR capabilities. I want to have the user experience match the same user experience that I use to make the content in the first place when I go to make the variation, right? The second piece is traffic allocation, right? So like when a request comes in, like what statistical model am I using to figure out how to route that traffic? Am I just doing a simple 50-50 split, or am I using something like a multi-armed bandit, algorithm to figure out how to pick a winner and, take a dynamically route traffic based off performance? And then there's the data collection piece of it, right? When that's like, heavy data analytics pipeline, you can go all the way from like I instrument certain server-side events on just checkout and add to cart, all the way to what like Full Story is doing, which is we record literally every single DOM mutation and interaction in the page, and we give you user behavioral data. I look at each one of those kind of pillars as like full product categories in and of themselves. And when I think about how Makeswift fits in this, I would like for Makeswift to have no opinions around how traffic allocation and data collection is done. I would like for it to hook into whatever tools people are currently using. And that brings me to where I'm like, well, Commerce should probably have a solution for this. We should be able to hook into Commerce's options for, traffic allocation and data collection, which they already have a lot of that. An analytics tool is usually a standalone tool. People have their favorites that they use. They have certain analytics tools wire into everything. When I think about composability, I look at composability is all about defining the right interface. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to creep Makeswift's responsibility out so far where we start to make assumptions that makes it where it can't fit into a stack with other tools. Makeswift is supposed to handle visual composition of components very well. We don't want to make assumptions about the components. We don't want to make assumptions around what the components are doing or where you're putting the data. We just want to handle the layout and content of the props of those components. That makes sense.
So, Alan, with this powerful platform and the roadmap that we discussed, lots of it is in the future and coming, and the value is to be generated. Talk to me about the value that you guys already generate for the merchants today, for the customers that are using the platform actively and are not just implementing it to see the results, but who are the users with some experience. And since you aspire to cut the content production management time to make it easier for marketers to work with it, give me a couple of stories there and a couple of companies that you can maybe mention, a couple of use cases.
Yeah, definitely. So I can speak to the time it took for Chase Corporation to launch their new site. They, I think, did the full end-to-end build in 3 months, which, from my understanding of typical end-to-end ground-up, e-commerce, like enterprise e-commerce builds, takes considerably longer than that. The other one that I've heard a lot about that I think is exciting is Euro Optic. I can't speak to the build time, but I can speak to how frequently they are deploying changes and publishing. We were testing a pricing model around publish frequency and seeing if that is a good access to assess value that customers are receiving from Makeswift. And I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but they're publishing so frequently that they keep running into it. I think they're giving us a lot of data that what typically used to be a larger initiative to like publish a campaign has now become so routine that it doesn't even come up. So I look at those as two really big successes with Makeswift.
I've seen your optics website and it's great. It just flies. We've built a couple of those on Stencil in that space for the optics companies, leaders in that space. And I certainly think that you guys have established a new level for us to aspire to
Awesome.
in terms of performance. Any other practical use cases today? And maybe talk to me about the edge cases or exotic ways and people are using Makeswift today that may not be
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple of really unique ones. One in particular that we're looking at where they're making a multi-tenant Next.js application to power about 3 to 5,000 Makeswift sites. So a lot of the Makeswift APIs are being designed currently in partnership with the agency and the client that needs this. And they basically want to have, a lot of the site be shared, but some of the sites be independent, and they want to have them separate, but living within one. They want to have one shared set of components for all of them, but apply different designs and brand tokens for each one. And that one has been a creative one for us to build. But the APIs that I'm referring to mainly are just like programmatic access to duplicate sites and duplicate pages, so that way we can like seed a new site with content. And that's something we should have. If anyone's interested in using that, they should reach out to me because we can add them to the early access for that. But that's a more complex build. I think the multi-tenant builds I think are really interesting. We've had a few of those pop up where there's like a fleet of sites they would like to manage, but they want to have a single set of components, but each site has their own brand. I think that's a perfect use case for Makeswift where I want to basically integrate my design system, but I don't want to come up with every unique permutation of layout for each block type for each one of those sites. And the integration there is probably even more simple in Makeswift than it would be for a single site, because you're not having, that's just every content type that you can skip, right? If I can only integrate, say by 15 design system components and not have to integrate all 100 or 200 permutations of those components, it saves a ton of development time.
So with those use cases that are great and show the value that can be generated, are there any myths out there in the marketplace or misconceptions that people have about Makeswift? And maybe hear those from customers, from partners, from prospects or competitors, any ones that are on top of your mind?
Yeah, definitely. I think one big myth is that I think there's a lot of people that think they need a full-blown CMS where they don't. I think
Mm.
that a lot of times it's overkill, right? The contract value is probably too high, and the feature breadth is something that they're not going to use everything that they have to offer, and they could actually solve the same job with Makeswift in a fraction of the time. I think people aspire to do a lot with the CMS that, typically when it comes to like omni-channel and even like personalization, that they could do inside of Makeswift. It's a different paradigm and a different mental model, right? Like Makeswift today supports personalization, and we have localization as a first party feature, but personalization is something that you can easily integrate. We have a guide on how to do it optimizedly on our blog. And you move things into the component layer. Same way a lot of CMSs do the same type of thing, where like the personalization features will hook into basically just you model the content and the different factors of your personalization inside the CMS, and then you kind of manually wire it up inside your code base. You can do the same things inside of Makeswift. I think that a lot of this comes down to us improving our documentation and guides. So that's a note for us to improve on.
So we've covered quite a lot. Let's deep dive into more of the technical stuff here. So what is your roadmap for versioning, slice publishing, scheduled rollouts of content, and the environment which is multi-branded or multi-locale, multi-site governance?
Yeah. So I'm happy to say that we have that's off the roadmap because it's already been implemented. So we have
Mm-hmm.
currently versioning slice publishing as well, which we don't really call it anything like that in the UI, but the ability to publish just certain elements or pieces of your page you can easily do.
Mm-hmm.
And rollbacks, we have the multi-brand, multi-site governance. You can achieve the one thing that's on our roadmap that we haven't shipped yet is site level permissioning. So right now, user permissions are at the workspace level, but we're going to be moving that down into the site level. So that way you can, give different access levels to different
Please,
sites within a workspace.
that'll be a godsend. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah,
Okay.
that's something that's in the immediate roadmap.
What about this development staging and production environments and the rollbacks? How would that work?
So today it looks very similar to how you manage that in other systems. In most of the other headless CMSs that I've seen, the way that it's done is you essentially have a
Mhm.
copy of the environment for development and staging. You can think of your environment as the site right now. So you would have
Okay.
a development site, a local development site, and then like a staging site and a production site. We recently shipped cross-site copy paste. We have a unique, a lot of people in, I guess, like in a page builder might think about like,
Mhm.
I want to move this page over, but similar to headless CMSs, like Contentful, right? They have like certain content types, and you might have multiple content types that compose into a page. Inside of Makeswift, think about your PDP, for example. We have multiple regions inside the PDP that we kind of load into the PDP from
Yep.
Makeswift. The way it works that we've decided to implement this feature is you can copy and paste a element or a section or basically anything that you can select in the UI, you can copy it and paste it into another site. And then now you can remap the resources. So when you paste something from another site, we automatically detect it. And then we take a best guess at how the mapping should occur. So but for colors, we look at the actual hex value. For typographies, we look at the name and the actual like font size values. And when you hit, and we'll remember that stuff. And when you import it, it will automatically map it to your resources in your production site, so you don't have to do any of that work yourself. So it's very similar to the workflow that you would see in other headless CMSs, except it looks more like a copy and paste.
You did mention that the roles today they exist at the space level, not the site level, and you're breaking that into more granular visibility, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then what about auditing and the audit logs of the changes made and so forth? Is that part of it today?
So currently we have an audit log in the publish dialog. So when you go to publish something, you can see who made the change. We will be adding in a granular audit trail of every operation in the builder that you'll see inside of like the settings view, but that is currently not in the product. That's in the roadmap though.
Okay. I'm going to ask more of a technical question, and this is the edge of my ability to comprehend it because my programming skills ended in the late 90s. How do you handle cache revalidation, edge delivery, and the preview fidelity with the Next.js? Obviously, it went all the way componentized, and do you have any opinionated defaults on that for that part of the audience that is more technically savvy?
Yeah, definitely. I love that you asked about preview fidelity, by the way. That's it's a great question. But I'm first going to talk about edge delivery and cache invalidation. So the way it works in Makeswift is most of that is handled by your hosting provider. So the way it works is we tag every publish, every version. That's how we do the instant rollbacks, is that every single publish in Makeswift is tagged. And then you basically leverage ISR and hook into, Next.js and Vercel incremental stack regeneration features in order to manage the cache. And then that should be cached on Vercel's edge. We are potentially going to add in an edge delivery network for our content. It really hasn't been necessary so far because everyone's deploying on Vercel right now. and Vercel handles this on their end, so we haven't had anyone ask for it. But if it's something that people require, then we will build that.
You mentioned Vercel. Very interesting. We also use them for hosting most of our headless builds today. What about Netlify? Have you guys run into any kind of issues on hosting Next.js on Netlify?
We've tested on Netlify, and it seems to work just fine. We don't have any production builds on Netlify today. No.
Okay. Does that mean that you guys are going to be in strategic partnership with Vercel going forward, or are you considering potentially hosting the sites themselves?
I think that we'll always be working with Vercel closely, just because we want to support Next.js hosting. At the people want the Cadillac version of hosting, they're going to go with Vercel. So we want to make sure that everything plays well. And also, too, as they roll out new features, Vercel is always the first one to adopt it, and everyone else is always kind of playing catch up. So I think one of the things that we are trying to get better at is balancing working on the bleeding edge. Next.js is rolling out lots of new features with PPR and cache components and things like that, and we want to be careful around how quickly we adopt these new tools, especially while Vercel is still figuring them out and optimizing around them. So that's been a tricky thing to balance. Is we want to make things as good as possible for the developers, but we also have learned that rolling out updates and adopting things that are a little bit too new can also have adverse effects for people pulling in updates.
BigCommerce's default templating theming engine today is based on Stencil. Lots of themes are available on the marketplace that are built on Stencil, Cornerstone, off of the Cornerstone demo store, and it's being iterated upon, so version after version, so it's being improved. You guys made an announcement in August that you're going to make Makeswift available on Stencil. What does that look like for somebody operating a Stencil website today?
That's something we're really excited about. So thanks for asking about that. We're going to be letting in smaller cohorts of interested customers and partners to work with. So anyone who's really interested in using Makeswift early, let us know. The way to think about the phases is that there's going to be a version of using Makeswift on Stencil without migrations, and then there's going to be a version with migrations, and we're probably going to run an alpha for both. The first version of it is going to look like, for those who've been inside of Catalyst, if you go to like the login page, there's like a little piece of content to the right of the login form that you can click, and then you can basically say, don't show that fallback, let me build something on top of it. We're basically going to treat the existing stencil regions as fallbacks inside of Makeswift. So you'll be able to open your site separately from Page Builder, and all of the stuff, all the Page Builder content will show up inside the Makeswift Builder, but it won't be like visually editable. You won't be able to go in there and make changes to it, but you can essentially delete it and replace it with content. And we're going to have the widgets that you've built loaded inside of Makeswift at that time. So there will be no Page Builder to Makeswift data migration at that point. And the use case that we're targeting there is letting people who want to start building stuff, they just want to change that section on the homepage and want to just go ahead and get started with Makeswift, and they're fine with rebuilding just that one region from scratch, which I think there's probably a lot of people that fall in that camp. That gives them an avenue to start getting value as soon as possible. The second phase is going to be migrating the Page Builder data into Makeswift data. So that way, all of those Page Builder widgets have an equivalent inside of Makeswift as a little element that I can select and delete and change properties. That will be the second alpha that we roll out. And the dream and state here is that for everybody, once we get through all of this testing and make sure everything looks good, people should wake up one day, they should have a single button that they click saying, hey, I want to migrate my site to Makeswift. It'll make a copy of it into Makeswift, and they just open it up. It looks the exact same. They can just start moving stuff around and get access to all the Makeswift features. And if they want to keep it, they just point their DNS over to the new copied site.
And that beautiful future is approximately when? Is that next year, 2027, or is that closer than we think?
It's closer. I think right now we're targeting H1 of next year of letting customers in to start trying this stuff. Yeah, I think that we'll be ears to the ground on there's always edge cases. People do lots of customizations. I mean, we're having to consider things like people injecting in scripts that potentially target things from the script manager that override stuff. So there's a lot of edge cases that we're going to need to work through in the migration. Like the migration is going to be a big rabbit hole, but I think we've got a good plan right now. I would say that the H1 next year is when we want to start letting customers in at the latest to start getting feedback. But in terms of like a fully stable GA release, that'll be dependent on how those early alphas go.
What's one feature that's a hidden gem inside Makeswift? When I install Makeswift and begin to generate content with it, what is a feature that you have developed and you feel passionate about that people do not use today as they should?
I would say, generally speaking, just like all the layout features in Makeswift, and the backgrounds and animations. I think that my hot take is that you don't need to use Figma once you have Makeswift set up. We don't use it for like the Makeswift.com site. That's all built in Makeswift. Our designer loves Figma. Don't get me wrong, love Figma. But once you have your design system inside of Makeswift, the whole point of a visual builder is to visually build stuff. So why would I build something in Figma and then bring it over? I think a lot of people default to the mental model that they've thought about with their previous headless CMSs, and they make big components for full sections, and they don't build as much stuff inside of Makeswift as they should. That's what I would love to see people do more. We have some ideas around helping people get a better feel for the builder, so that way they get a little bit more comfortable with it. But I think that usually starts with the developer. I think one thing I wish the developers that are integrating to Makeswift would do is start by learning how much you can do visually inside the builder before you just start writing components, because that will inform the level of granularity that you build your components.
I'm not sure that my designers would love the answer about the Figma, because everybody is just building the design systems and all of my customers are in Figma, and it's very highly interactive, and they're obviously having a great roadmap themselves. Running websites on Figma you can do today, and interactive presentations, all of that. But then you said that Canva, Figma, this is where Makeswift is playing today.
Well, let me add some nuance to that, because I don't want it to sound like it's like you don't need Figma anymore, because Figma is still a very valuable part of the development workflow. But we use Figma for designing the building blocks, the components, the granular pieces that you'll be assembling. Once those are turned into code and integrated into Makeswift, most website creation is just assembling those. Most marketers should be working off the design system, right? They're just arranging them on a page. So we use Figma from going from Figma to code, but once it's code into Makeswift and you have your components inside of Makeswift, there's really not as much reason to go into Figma to just simply arrange your design system, if that makes sense.
So the preview fidelity, though, the one that you got really excited about in my question, how about that? How are you handling that with Next.js?
Yeah, that's something that we actually thought about very heavily at the beginning when you talked about, kind of taking it back to that conversation of landing line into Makeswift. So what we learned with landing line and just building visual builders in general is that when you put controls on the canvas, like the drag and drop controls on top of the canvas, there are different ways to do it. And because we are a headless, a headless application, we're not actually generating a preview of your site. So even the word preview fidelities doesn't really apply here, because we're literally iframing your site in there. And one of the things that we had to wrestle with is like, how do we get the controls in there, right? A lot of builders will inject controls into the actual, like into your site. So you install Makeswift into your site. One way we could have done it is we could have injected and like kind of added in inside of the DOM on your site all of our drag and drop controls, but we didn't want to take that risk of accidentally doing something that's going to A, affect performance, or B, make things look a little bit different. Because one of the things that we learned early on with landing line is that as soon as someone hits publish and they go to their live site and it looks even slightly off, trust is this very fragile piece of glass, right? And even like a tiny little crack in that glass is going to compromise people's ability to just say, hey, this looks good in the builder, let's just hit live. They're going to always question and need to publish stuff in order to check it. So we made a point to say, hey, we will not put anything inside of the host environment that's builder specific. And even so far as designing our features like interaction mode to make it so that way, if somebody wants to add in editability that requires a state change, so for instance, like tabs or accordions, right? You may have a hidden region inside of a tab or inside of an accordion that you need to like click on to open. You could add in a hook that says, if I'm in the builder, add this extra control, or like listen to this control from Makeswift. So there's a checkbox on the right-hand side or a toggle switch. And if I get a message from the Makeswift builder, then open it. But now you have code inside your code base specific to Makeswift. And we really wanted to avoid that. So interaction mode, because we're iframing in your actual site, and we're constantly polling every element on the DOM to figure out where it is, all you have to do is you have to switch in interaction mode, which is us hiding our control layer, which I'll talk about in a second, interacting with the component, and then switching back into build mode. And that makes it, the reason why we did it that way is that makes the surface area of the integration smaller. Developers don't have to think about Makeswift when they're adding in their components or designing their components. And that interaction layer that I was talking about, this was our approach to solving this issue, is that in order for us to not pollute the DOM with our controls, we actually put like a little hidden SVG layer on top of the canvas. And we measure everything. We're constantly polling every element. So that way, even if something's animating, our controls will always show up in the right spot. And it's more of an illusion. We're kind of placing them on top of the page. So everything, all the builder controls live inside of Makeswift world. They don't live inside of your code base at all. And that gives us the ability to guarantee parity between what you see in the builder and what you see in the live page.
So, Alan, you have been a founder, entrepreneur. You've chosen to stay at commerce.com after you got acquired, which is highly unusual for a founder to be in this place. And you're so excited about this product. I can feel the energy. I can feel the sentiment here. I can feel how passionate you are about the product and the future of commerce.com. What is your why? The biggest question about this is why? What's in it for you? Where do you see this going from being just a product to what? To make what kind of an impact or a change?
Yeah, we've had a very strong product vision since we started this out in 2017, and I think that over the years we've assembled a group of passionate, talented people that I love working with. Everybody that was. We've never lost an engineer on our team. I think what really you asked the why question. I
Mhm.
just I love the craftsmanship and the art of building products, and I think that I've always looked at this as we have this vision. I think that the when I think about website builders, I think people think that that you have to kind of there's solutions for small businesses and there's solutions for large businesses, and that's just the way it is. But then I look at tools like GitHub, right, and Git, and I think that when you nail the abstraction, there
Mhm.
exist solutions that work for everybody. And I have this belief that that exists for websites and just the web in general when it comes to like a visual editing layer. I think that we've struggled finding the right abstractions, and I think there's just kind of to my point earlier, like a lot of legacy baggage with how we've thought about those products that have held us back. The vision with Makeswift is to make a tool that is easy enough for you to self-service into for your first landing page, and then it scales all the way with you until you're Nike.com, for instance, right? And then you need to go fully headless and custom. Right now, that transition point from going from a hosted solution to a headless solution is very painful. And I don't think any tools solve this. Either you fall on one side or the other, right? Framer, Webflow, Wix, Squarespace, all those tools are hosted solutions. You can't self-host it, right? They need to have tight control over the host environment to power their user experiences. Or you have the headless solutions, which there is no easy on-ramp. A marketer can't onboard themselves onto Contentful by them, for instance. That's the vision that we've had. I've often compared it to like a modern version of WordPress. I think that's a big reason why WordPress has been so successful and is still something that people use today, is because they have that kind of transition point nailed. A marketer can self-service into a WordPress theme and get pretty far. And then there's a giant ecosystem of developers that know how to take from there and extend it. And what we really want to do is figure out what's the modern equivalent of that on this kind of, modern UI architecture. So I think that's a big part of the why. And then, we really just are inspired by amazing products. I mean, I look at tools like Linear, Notion, there's a
Oh
certain
yeah.
level of craft that you can put into a product that elevates it beyond what people thought it could be, right? Like I look at Linear versus Jira. This is something I feel very passionate about. I feel like Linear has taken a very boring, there's a million products in the project management space, and they've figured out a way to thread the needle and make it so good that people internally champion it because they're like, oh, my life would be much easier if I could use something that has this much attention to detail. And I think we all on the Makeswift team have that kind of care and attention to detail. So, I've always wanted to see if we can achieve that. And this whole deal with, joining Commerce was really the reason why we took the opportunity to join Commerce. Is we built our own kind of version of Catalyst before we knew Catalyst even existed on the headless APIs. And we showed it to the BigCommerce team, and they, obviously they're like, oh, this looks familiar. This looks awesome, because they were working on their new reference architecture, but they didn't have a visual builder solution to it. So I think I can imagine what it felt like from there, and to see us present this to them and the synergies. And what really sold it to us was their acknowledgement of the potential that we have as a standalone product. I think that that was a big part of the conversation was, the CMS space is crowded. To your point, it's really tough to differentiate. It's really competitive. It's hard to fundraise. And we have been at it for a while. So, when you're fundraising, older your company is, the harder it is to fundraise. That's the kind of just like general VCs in general would prefer the founder that spent 2 weeks working on something and have traction than somebody who's been developing domain expertise for the better part of, a decade. So
Yeah.
it's just, it is what it is. And what we were really excited about was the opportunity to distribute Makeswift to the BigCommerce space. And that's why I'm really excited about the Stencil opportunities that, we've been working on this product for so long. We're very passionate about it. And, really distribution is a challenge. So we wanted to get into the hands of the BigCommerce customer base, but we wanted to align with leadership that saw the full potential that Makeswift could be. And we're still very much motivated by that. So this has all been kind of part of the plan. When we joined, it was first we focused on Catalyst, then we focused on Stencil, and then we focused on standalone. I think that there's rising demand for Makeswift that's getting the team more and more excited every day. We're trying to accelerate that timeline as fast as possible. But, I'm feeling very confident about our ability to get this thing on Stencil and to get it to the broader base and beyond that.
Alan, thank you. I think you have a great tailwind today from all the people in the industry who are very supportive of the effort. So partners, agencies, technology partners, as well as customers, existing customers who have a lot of trust. How can people get in touch with you? How can people get their hands on the product and try it out and see what it is? What are the ways to connect with you?
So if you're in the BigCommerce ecosystem, reach out to your rep, and I'm happy to connect with anybody that wants to chat with me. I think that would probably be the best place to reach out to me, on Twitter as well, or on LinkedIn to connect with me, and just include that you saw this and you want to have a chat. If you're passionate about some of the ideas that I'm talking about, or if you agree with me, even if you disagree with me, I want to hear your takes as well, and let that steer where we're going.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alan, pleasure. Thank you so much, Alan, for your time. And I look forward to our next conversations with you in the future of the roadmap. And it's so bright that we need to wear sunglasses. But thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Sergei.